What happens when country music's biggest star walks into the lion's den of daytime television and refuses to back down from one of the most outspoken hosts in America? Well, you're about to witness one of the most explosive confrontations ever captured on live TV. And trust me, you won't believe how this all unfolds. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this story is absolutely wild from start to finish. Blake Shelton strolled onto the View set with his usual confident swagger, flashing that trademark grin as he settled into the guest chair. The audience erupted in applause, clearly excited to see the country superstar. Whoopi Goldberg welcomed him warmly, and the initial conversation flowed smoothly as they discussed his latest album and upcoming tour dates. But then Joy Behar leaned forward, her expression shifting to something more pointed. "Blake, I have to ask you about some comments you made recently about the music industry and political correctness. A lot of people found them pretty controversial." Blake's smile remained, but there was a slight edge to his voice when he responded. "Well, Joy, I think people are tired of being told what they can and can't say. Country music has always been about telling the truth, even when it makes folks uncomfortable." Joy wasn't backing down. "But don't you think artists have a responsibility to be mindful of their platform? Your words reach millions of people, and those millions of people are smart enough to think for themselves," Blake shot back, his tone becoming more assertive. "They don't need celebrities or TV hosts telling them what to believe." The tension in the studio was palpable. Whoopi tried to steer the conversation toward safer ground, asking about Blake's experience on The Voice, but Joy wasn't finished. "I find it interesting that you talk about truth-telling when country music has historically excluded so many voices," Joy continued, her voice rising slightly. "How do you reconcile that with your comments about authenticity?" Blake's jaw tightened visibly. "You know what, Joy? I think you might be confusing country music with something else. Country music has always welcomed anyone who can tell a good story and mean it when they sing it. We don't care about your background. We care about your heart." "Really?" Joy pressed. "Because the statistics say otherwise. The industry has been criticized for years for lack of diversity." "Statistics?" Blake repeated, shaking his head. "You want to talk about statistics? Let me tell you what I see when I'm out there on tour. I see people from every walk of life singing along to the same songs, crying at the same stories, laughing at the same jokes. That's what matters, not some numbers on a piece of paper." The other hosts exchanged glances, sensing the growing friction. Sarah Haynes attempted to jump in with a lighter question, but Blake was clearly getting heated. "And furthermore," he continued, pointing a finger toward Joy, "I'm getting real tired of people like you sitting in your ivory towers, telling the rest of us how we should live our lives and what we should think. You don't speak for country music fans, and you sure don't speak for America." Joy's eyes flashed with anger. "Excuse me, people like me. What exactly does that mean, Blake?" "It means people who think they know better than everyone else," Blake replied without hesitation. "People who look down on folks from small towns and rural areas like we're all just a bunch of ignorant hillbillies." The studio audience was dead silent now. The earlier warmth completely evaporated. Whoopi was frantically trying to regain control of the situation, but both Blake and Joy were locked in their confrontation. "I have never called anyone ignorant," Joy defended herself. "But I do think we need to have honest conversations about representation and inclusion." "Honest conversations?" Blake laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels more like an interrogation. You invited me here supposedly to talk about music, but all you want to do is lecture me about politics." The cameras were capturing every moment of the escalating tension, and the production team was clearly scrambling to figure out how to handle the situation. This was live television at its most unpredictable. Joyce slammed her hand on the table, the sound echoing through the stunned studio. "You know what, Blake? I've been doing this for decades, and I don't need some country singer coming on here and telling me how to do my job." Blake leaned back in his chair, a dangerous smile spreading across his face. "And I don't need some talk show host who's never set foot in Nashville telling me about my industry. You want to talk about inclusion? Let's talk about how you include country music on this show. When's the last time you had a country artist on here who wasn't being grilled about politics?" "That's not true," Joy fired back. "We've had plenty of country artists. Name 3 from the last 2 years. Blake challenged, crossing his arms. Joy opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly struggling to come up with names. The pause was deafening. "That's what I thought," Blake said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. You don't actually care about country music or the people who make it. You just want to use us as punching bags when it's convenient for your agenda. Whoopi finally managed to interject. Blake, let's take a step back here. I think we're all getting a little heated. But Blake was on a roll now, his Oklahoma accent becoming more pronounced as his anger built. No, Whoopi. I'm tired of taking steps back. I'm tired of watching people in the media trash country music and the people who love it. We're not your enemy, but you sure seem determined to make us out to be. Joy had regained her composure and wasn't backing down. Nobody's calling you the enemy, Blake. But when you make statements that can be interpreted as exclusionary, people are going to call that out. Exclusionary? Blake's voice rose significantly. Lady, I've spent my entire career trying to bring people together through music. I've mentored singers from every background you can imagine on The Voice. I've collaborated with artists across every genre. What have you done to bring people together besides divide them on this show every single day? The audience was completely silent, many looking uncomfortable as they witnessed this verbal battle unfold. Sunny Host attempted to mediate, but Joy cut her off. How dare you question what I've done? Joy snapped. I've been fighting for civil rights and equality long before you were even famous. Fighting? Blake laughed harshly. Is that what you call sitting behind this desk throwing stones at people? Because where I come from, fighting means getting your hands dirty, not just running your mouth. The color drained from Joy's face. You need to watch your tone with me, young man. Or what? Blake challenged, leaning forward in his chair. You'll cancel me. You'll write some scathing article about how terrible I am. Go ahead, Joy. I've been in this business long enough to know that controversy sells records. Alyssa Farah Griffin tried desperately to change the subject. Blake, let's talk about your charity work. I know you've done a lot for disaster relief, but Blake was locked onto Joy now, his frustration boiling over. You know what the real problem is here? You can't stand the fact that there are still places in America where people think differently than you do. You can't stand that country music represents values and ideas that don't align with your worldview. That's not true, Joy protested. But her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Isn't it? Blake pressed. Then why do you and people like you constantly attack everything we stand for? Our music, our beliefs, our way of life. You act like we're some kind of disease that needs to be cured. Joy's anger reignited. Nobody's attacking your way of life, Blake. But when your way of life involves looking down on others or excluding people, then yes, that's going to be criticized. There you go again, Blake said, shaking his head in disgust, putting words in my mouth, making assumptions about who I am and what I believe. You don't know me, Joy. You don't know where I come from or what I've been through, but you're perfectly comfortable sitting there judging me based on some stereotype you have in your head. The production team was clearly in panic mode with stage managers frantically communicating through their headsets. This was live television spiraling completely out of control, and there seemed to be no way to reel it back in. Joy stood up from her chair, her face flushed with anger. You want to know what I know about you, Blake? I know that you have a platform that reaches millions of people, and instead of using it responsibly, you use it to perpetuate division. Blake shot to his feet as well, towering over the table. Perpetuate division. That's rich coming from someone who makes a living stirring up controversy every single day. At least I bring people joy with my music. What do you bring besides anger and resentment? I bring truth, Joy shot back, her voice shaking with fury. I bring accountability, something you clearly aren't familiar with. Truth? Blake's laugh was bitter and cold. Your version of truth maybe, but here's some real truth for you, Joy. The people you claim to represent, the working-class Americans you say you're fighting for, they're the same people buying my records and coming to my concerts. They don't need you to speak for them. Whoopi was frantically trying to restore order. Okay, everyone. Let's just take a breath here. We're all adults. We can disagree without it getting personal. But Blake wasn't finished. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more weight than his earlier shouting. You know what's really sad about this whole thing, Joy? You could have had a real conversation with me today. You could have asked me about my music, about the stories behind my songs, about the fans who come up to me with tears in their eyes, telling me how my music helped them through tough times. Instead, you chose to ambush me with gotcha questions and political talking points. Joy sat back down, but her posture remained defiant. I asked you legitimate questions about statements you made publicly. If you can't handle being questioned about your own words, maybe you shouldn't be making those statements. Handle it? Blake's voice rose again. Lady, I can handle anything you throw at me. But I'm not going to sit here and let you twist my words and paint me as something I'm not. I've spent my entire career treating people with respect, regardless of their background, their politics, or anything else. Can you say the same? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Joy's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to respond. I have dedicated my life to fighting for equality and justice, she said. But her voice lacked its earlier fire. Fighting for your version of equality, Blake corrected. Your version of justice. But what about the millions of Americans who don't see the world the way you do? Where's their representation on this show? Where's their voice in your fight for equality? Sarah Haynes made another attempt to intervene. Blake, I think what Joy is trying to say is that everyone deserves to be heard and included. Blake turned his attention to Sarah, his expression softening slightly, and I agree with that completely, Sarah. But inclusion works both ways. It means including people from small towns and rural areas, too. It means not automatically assuming that someone's a bigot just because they live in Oklahoma or Tennessee or Alabama. Joy couldn't stay quiet. Nobody's assuming anything about anyone based on where they live. Aren't you? Blake challenged, whirling back to face her. Because every time country music gets mentioned on this show, it's accompanied by some snide comment about backwards thinking or outdated values. Every time someone from the South or the Midwest gets brought up, there's this underlying assumption that they must be ignorant or prejudiced. That's not true, Joy insisted, but her protest sounded weak. It absolutely is true, Blake fired back. And you know what the worst part is? You're perpetuating the very kind of stereotyping and prejudice that you claim to be fighting against. You're just doing it to people you think it's okay to look down on. The studio was dead silent, except for the hum of the cameras and equipment. Even the audience seemed to be holding their breath, transfixed by this raw, unfiltered confrontation playing out before them. Blake shook his head slowly, his anger giving way to something that looked almost like disappointment. You know, Joy, I came on this show hoping to have a real conversation. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could find some common ground. But all you wanted was a fight. I wanted honesty, Joy replied quietly. No, Blake said firmly. You wanted to prove a point. You wanted to make me the villain in your story. Well, congratulations. You got your confrontation. I hope it was worth it. Joy's face went pale as Blake's words hit their mark. She sat in stunned silence for several seconds before finding her voice again. You think I wanted this to happen? You think I enjoy confrontation? I think you live for it, Blake replied without hesitation, slowly sitting back down, but maintaining his intense stare. I think controversy is your brand, and you'll manufacture it wherever you can find it. That's completely unfair, Joy protested, her voice cracking slightly. I ask the questions that need to be asked. I hold people accountable. Blake leaned forward, his voice becoming more measured, but no less intense. Accountable to who, Joy? To you, to this show, or to the millions of people whose lives and values you dismiss every single day? Whoopi made one more desperate attempt to salvage the interview. Blake, I think we've gotten off track here. Can we please just focus on your music? But Blake wasn't ready to let it go. His eyes never left Joy as he continued. You want to know what's really ironic about all this? Country music is probably the most inclusive genre there is when it comes to storytelling. We sing about everybody. The factory worker, the farmer, the single mom, the veteran coming home from war, the kid from the wrong side of the tracks trying to make something of himself. We don't exclude anyone from our stories. Joy finally found her fire again. But you do exclude people from your industry. The numbers don't lie, Blake. The numbers, Blake repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. You keep coming back to numbers like they tell the whole story. But numbers don't capture the heart of what we do. Numbers don't show the kid in rural Mississippi who picked up a guitar because he heard one of my songs. Numbers don't show the dreams we inspire or the hope we give people. Hope, Joy scoffed. What hope are you giving to young women trying to break into country music? What hope are you giving to artists of color who can't get radio play? Blake's composure finally cracked completely. He stood up again, this time moving closer to Joy's side of the table. You want to talk about hope? I've mentored more diverse artists on The Voice than this show has probably featured in its entire run. I've used my platform to lift up people from every background imaginable. But that doesn't fit your narrative, does it? The security team was clearly on high alert now, though Blake made no threatening moves. His anger was purely verbal, but it was more intense than anything The View had ever experienced during a live broadcast. Don't you dare lecture me about giving people hope, Blake continued, his voice shaking with emotion. Do you know how many letters I get from fans telling me my music helped them through divorce, through depression, through losing a job or losing a loved one? Do you know how many people tell me that country music saved their lives? Joy's defiance was wavering, but she pressed on. I'm not diminishing that, Blake. But you can't ignore the systemic issues in the industry. Systemic issues. Blake exploded. You want to talk about systemic issues? How about the systemic bias against country music in mainstream media? How about the systematic way shows like this one portray country artists and country fans as ignorant or backwards? How about the systematic exclusion of country music from award shows and major cultural events? The other hosts were completely silent, now watching this verbal bloodbath unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror. This was uncharted territory for daytime television. Blake wasn't finished. You sit there in your bubble in New York City, surrounded by people who think exactly like you do, and you have the audacity to lecture me about inclusion. When's the last time you spent time in a small town, Joy? When's the last time you had a real conversation with someone who disagrees with your politics? I talk to people who disagree with me every day, Joy replied weakly. No, you argue with them, Blake corrected. There's a difference. Talking means listening. It means trying to understand. It means showing respect for people even when you disagree with them. Joy's voice was barely above a whisper. Now I do show respect. Do you? Blake challenged. Because nothing about this interview has felt respectful to me. Nothing about the way you've approached this conversation suggests that you have even the slightest interest in understanding my perspective or the perspectives of the people I represent. The studio was so quiet you could hear the cameras clicking as they captured every moment of this extraordinary confrontation. Blake took a deep breath and seemed to regain some control over his emotions. You know what the saddest part about all this is, Joy? We probably agree on more things than we disagree on. We both care about people. We both want to see everyone have opportunities to succeed. We both believe in the power of art and entertainment to bring people together. But instead of finding that common ground, you chose to make this about politics and division. Joy looked genuinely shaken now, her earlier bravado completely gone. I never meant for it to go this way. Maybe you didn't, Blake said, his voice softening slightly for the first time since the confrontation began. But this is what happens when you approach every conversation as a battle instead of an opportunity to learn something new. He straightened his shirt and looked directly into the camera. To everyone watching at home, I want you to know that this is exactly why so many people are fed up with the media and the entertainment industry. This is why trust is at an all-time low, because instead of having real conversations, we get ambush interviews and gotcha moments. Blake turned back to the hosts. I came here today hoping to talk about music, about the joy it brings people, about the stories we tell and the connections we make. Instead, I got interrogated about politics by someone who clearly has no interest in understanding the world I come from. Whoopi finally managed to speak. Blake, I think there might have been some miscommunication here. No, Whoopi, Blake said firmly. There was no miscommunication. This was exactly what Joy intended from the moment I walked onto this set. She had her mind made up about who I am and what I represent before I ever said a word. With that, Blake pulled off his microphone and set it on the table. Thanks for having me on the show. I hope your audience got what they came for. As he walked toward the exit, the entire studio remained frozen in stunned silence. This wasn't just a heated interview gone wrong. This was a complete breakdown of the typical talk show format. And everyone knew they had just witnessed television history. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments. Do you think Blake Shelton was justified in his reaction, or did Joy Behar have valid points that needed to be addressed?